Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jeff Morosevich. I'm the Deputy Director of Stormwater and Collections for the Municipal Utilities. We're here today to present our stormwater rate increase effort. I have with us Sean Korn. He's from HCR Engineering. He's the rate study expert that helped us develop this. And Kim Floyd, she's our outreach person. I have Dagmara Saini, she's our PM3, and Daniel Ramirez, our PM2 now, is it? One? So we're going to go ahead and get started here. So some of the key points that we're going to hit on today are the fact that our stormwater system is at a breaking point. It's very old. It hasn't been invested in a long time, and it needs a lot of work and upkeep. It's also important to note that our stormwater utility must be self-supporting. That means we can't get money from any other source. We can't take it from the sewer fund. We can't take it from the water fund. It must come from our stormwater fee. Right now, the revenues don't cover the cost of providing service. I mean, this is the main message. It's been stagnant for 34 years, and we just simply can't keep doing what we're doing without more revenue. So additional revenues are just going to be required to avoid flood risk and have more problems in our storm system. So what we're proposing is a rate adjustment over the next 5 years to cover the cost for daily operations and maintenance. That's cleaning the storm basins, fixing pipes, working on pump stations. And deferred maintenance, we have years of maintenance that we haven't done because we just don't have the money to fix the system. And then capital improvements projects, things where we know we have deficiencies. We need bigger pumps, for example, at a pump station, things like that. So I just want to give a quick overview on the stormwater system. I think most people kind of understand inherently that when a drop of water hits an impervious surface area like a driveway or a parking lot, that it has to go somewhere. And it goes down that surface and into a gutter and into a catch basin and eventually into our system. And we have to get that water out to the waterways around us. So we serve 243,000 customers. It consists of 23,000 catch basins, so those are the round things you see in the gutter or square things. We have 77 pump stations, which is actually a fairly large number for a city our size, geographic size. And that's because we are surrounded by waterways and we have to pump water up and over the levees and into the water. We have about 19 detention basins. Those are those big holes you see in the ground with a fence around them, and that's so we can put the storm water in them. So sometimes where they could percolate in the ground, sometimes so we can meter that water out into the body of water that storm water is going to. We have about 620 miles of pipeline, and we have about 100 gravity discharge outlets. Those are non-pump stations, but they're still where the water goes out of the pipe and into the receiving water. And something that I don't have on the slide, but we also have a whole division in our section that just deals with regulatory compliance. So not only do we have to maintain the system, but we have a permit with the state, and we have a lot of regulations on what we put into the water around us. So we have to do sampling, we have to do trash capture, we have to do a lot of reporting to the state. So there's a whole other component to our stormwater system. So what problems are we trying to resolve with this? Again, aging infrastructure, that's the number one take home. If anyone here hasn't had a raise for 34 years, probably couldn't afford to live your lifestyle. This fund hasn't had a raise in 34 years. The system is not adapting to current climate conditions. I know, climate change is a kind of a charged term nowadays, but the fact is, if you've lived here a long time, you know that we're having a lot more intense rainfall, maybe less of it sometimes, but when it does rain, we get a lot of rain, like in 2023. Another important thing to note is that the age of the system tends to impact the disadvantaged communities more because they're older. So some of the older communities have the worst storm infrastructure. And again, the cost of service must be covered by customer rates, so we have nowhere else to get the money. So how did we get here? What caused the problem? Again, our rate was established in 1992. It was $2.10 per residential parcel. It hasn't been increased since then. We did try to go out for a stormwater rate increase in 2010, and we were defeated. So it's not like we haven't tried this before, but the voters said no last time. So here we are again saying this thing's about ready to fall apart, and we need help. So that underfunding has caused backlog in deferred maintenance, some of the things I've mentioned before. No funding for critical improvements, and depletion of reserve funds. So when we do have a disaster, like a storm like 2023, we don't have reserve funds to pull from. We have to go ask the general fund for money if we are out of money, and that's a hard ask. So this will be the first fiscal year where we're actually going to be in deficit. So starting in 2027, we'll be in a $5 million deficit. So there's going to come a point, if we can't get an increase, where we just stop doing stuff that we're doing now because we just won't have the money to do it. So how do we solve the problems? Obviously, we need more money. We have to adequately fund our day-to-day operations. That's cleaning out those catch basins. That's fixing lines when they collapse, all of that stuff. We have to address the backlog of deferred maintenance. We have about $285 million in capital improvement projects that have been identified by our Stormwater Master Plan. And so we need to get working on those. Those deficiencies are just going to get worse over time. And again, we need to restore reserve funds. So if we have an emergency, we have money to fix it. So there's a consequence to any vote, right? You vote yes, we're going to have more money, we're going to fix things. If we do nothing, we're just going to have more deferred maintenance. We're going to defer all of our critical CIP projects. We aren't going to fix those deficient pump stations. We're just going to keep band-aiding and hoping they work. It's going to increase the risk of flood damage. Again, it affects disadvantaged communities more, so those poor areas are going to be the ones that get worse first. It's going to increase the risk of pollution in our local waterways because we are going to we'll have less capacity to regulate what we're putting into the receiving waters, and that will create a risk of regulatory fines and water quality violations. So that's kind of my big, where we are at now. I manage this system, so I'm very aware of the challenges we face, and again, 34 years without a raise, and this fund needs a raise. So now I want to turn it over to Sean. He's going to go into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of how a rate study is done.
Thank you, Jeff. So as we go through a process of establishing utility rates, it's governed by what's known as Proposition 218, and that's codified in the California Constitution. And it outlines different procedures and approaches that need to be met so that the rates are deemed cost-based and proportional. And as we go through this process to maintain the cost basis and to develop the proportionality, we go through a comprehensive rate study, and that's 3 steps, including a revenue requirement, a cost of service, and a rate design. The revenue requirement is the financial plan. It's the checkbook for the stormwater utility. We have utility revenues coming in at that $2.10 per equivalent unit, and we have all our expenses going out, both the operating and the capital side. That revenue requirement determines what's that overall need to adequately fund the operating and capital needs of the stormwater utility. Once we've identified those needs, the next step then is to develop the cost of service. And that's where we look at the proportionality of the rate that's charged to a single family home versus a larger complex with much larger impervious area, pavement in front of the grocery store, or larger industrial properties that have much more impervious area, concrete, asphalt, roofs, etc., that would drive the water away and into the stormwater system. The cost of service comes back and evaluates that on an equivalent unit basis. So each single family home is one equivalent unit. Anything not a single family home would be charged multiple numbers of equivalent units based on how much impervious area they have or how much hard surface they have that the rain can't permeate into the ground with. So that's how we maintain the proportionality between you and your single family home versus the grocery store, the restaurant, with all of this larger asphalt and concrete around them as part of that. Once we know the first 2 steps, the next step then is to design that rate to recover the cost. There are different methods that we can use to establish a stormwater rate. However, the city's approach, that equivalent unit approach, is one of the most commonly used methods to establish a stormwater utility rate. So we've maintained that as part of this study. So that's that current $2.10 that hasn't been changed since the early 90s. Now, when we look at that financial plan or that revenue requirement, Jeff talked about the annual operating needs that are necessary to maintain the system and those capital improvement projects that are needed to improve the system, to alleviate flooding issues, to maintain that system so it's not depleting and aging and unable to provide that level of service. So what we have here in 26, 27 is our current revenues based on the rates in place today, and that's just over $7 million. That's that bottom blue piece on this chart. That's our revenues today and into the future, if there's no rate adjustment. The top part, up to the top, and the green, is our operating and capital need that's been identified over the next 5-year period, which is the rate setting period for the utility rates. So as we look at this, Jeff mentioned a deficiency going into fiscal year 27. That's this green piece right here that we're unable to fund. Historically, as the budgets have been put together and the systems the stormwater system has been maintained and operated, reserves have been reused. So cash that's been put in the bank in prior years is paying the bills. There's no longer any cash left in the bank, or not sufficient amount of cash in the bank to fund this. That's the other reason we're looking at this. Not only has the rate not changed, but there are no reserves available at this point in time. So to maintain the system prudently, to fund those capital improvement projects that the master plan identified to improve the system, we would need to generate this total revenue level over time. That's what drives our overall proposed rate transition plan. So getting our total revenues to the top of the bars in each of those years, we start today at $2.10, and if adopted and approved through the Proposition 218 process, which we're in right now as part of that, the rate would increase $1.75 and then increase all the way out to $8.10 by the end of the 5th year, if approved by the City Council as part of this process. So again, that generates the revenue from all customers, single family, residential, et cetera, to fund our total identified revenue needs out into the future as part of that. So that would be the rate that at your single family home, as an example, that you would be paying each of the years per month out into the future if this were adopted. Now, we try and look at other comparable agencies. Jeff mentioned that you all are a little bit unique given your topography. So you have a lot of water, we have some rolling hills, we have to move the water, the stormwater to the appropriate water outlet and discharge point. So you have a slightly more complicated system, but compared to a few others, here's our current rate. The year 1 rate, so fiscal year 27, so that would start July 1 of 2026. And then our final year, our 5th year, if approved. What you can see here with the City of Davis, City of Sacramento, San Francisco PUC, City of Elk Grove, and City of San Jose, they already today have rates established at that 5th year level or higher. Again, it's not an apples to apples. There's a lot of different factors that drive the different rates, but these are recent adjustments to stormwater rates by these agencies that have gone through this same Prop 218 process and were established to support those utilities' operating and capital costs. Some of these are looking at additional increases. Others have some on the books, so they've adopted a multi-year plan. Overall, again, we're right in that comparison at the end of our 5-year period as part of this process, just as a regional comparison purpose. Now, I mentioned Proposition 218. It requires us to put together an analysis to support the cost basis and the proportionality that I've talked about. Another key component of Proposition 218 is how we adopt the rates and what process we go through. So for stormwater, it's a 2-step process. So we have an initial protest vote that was sent out. That period is closed. That was at our meeting a couple weeks ago, was the final meeting for that. There was not a majority protest. So if 50% of the customers would have said no, we wouldn't be here tonight. We'd have to come back and do another Prop 218 process. We did not receive the majority protest, so now we go to the ballot side of it. And that's where you all should have received a ballot. If you didn't, come see us at the end of this. But if you receive the ballot, and as part of that, then 50%, more than 50% of the returned ballots have to say yes, vote yes, for the council to be able to implement the proposed rates. So this is almost like a typical ballot vote where we check yes or no, and the yeses, more yeses have to come in the door than no's come in the door as part of this. So very different than what water and sewer process is. Stormwater has a little unique process. So if you have more questions on this, we can talk about this afterwards. And for now, I'll turn.
One vote per property.
Oh,
If
good
you have
point.
multiple properties, you get a vote for each one.
So again, my name is Kim Floyd. I'm a public outreach consultant to the city, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens, the consequences of yes or no. When I talk to groups, I like to remind them that there's no such thing as a no consequence vote. Both a yes vote and a no vote have costs. So if rates are approved, the stormwater rates that Sean showed, the $2 to 10 cents all the way up to $8.10 would take effect starting August 1 of this year. So that'll be by the end of the 5th year, a $6 increase over what you're paying now per month. By law, the city can only use those revenues to fund stormwater system operations and maintenance, capital, and repairs. That's it. It can't go to the general fund, it can't go to roads, it can't pay for anything else. The city will use those revenues to prioritize deferred maintenance and capital improvement projects. As the deputy director said in his comments, there is a great need throughout the city, especially in our disadvantaged areas, to bring them up to speed and up to standards and make sure that we reduce flood risk for all properties. And that's the ultimate outcome. If rates are approved, flood risk will be reduced. Is this the clicker? Okay, so what happens if they're not approved? Well, existing rate revenues do not currently and will not cover either operating and maintenance costs or deferred maintenance or capital improvement projects. The reserve funds that are remaining will be eliminated by June 30, 2026. So you won't have those backup funds for emergencies or to cover shortfalls in operating revenues. Now, as far as operating revenues go, the utility for the first time is going to face a significant deficit, $5 million, starting in July of 2027. Now, at that point, there really isn't any choice but to cut levels of service. There's nothing else that they will be able to do. So that's delaying capital projects, putting them off indefinitely, deferring that annual maintenance. Those storm drains that they talked about, you said the 24,000 storm drains. Somebody has to clean those. We'll have to reduce the number that are cleaned and reduce emergency response. So when your street backs up because we couldn't clean the storm drains and you call and say my street's flooding, they will have a reduced ability to respond to that. So the potential outcomes, increased flood damage. Now, we didn't really hit upon it, but in 2023, do you all remember the big burst of storms we got in January and March? We had street flooding, we had pump stations that broke down, we had houses that were flooded. Our system simply isn't designed to handle the type of weather systems that we're seeing come through right now. So we'll see that increase. You could have a catastrophic system failure. So what do we do if we have a major system failure like a pump station burned down like it did in 2023 and we have no reserve funds to pay for a new one? What do we do? Increased likelihood of pollution in waterways, because we didn't hit upon it very much, but those outfalls that go directly into our waterways, we have to maintain those so that we can do trash capture, so we can, because anything that goes down that storm rate goes right out into our delta, into our sloughs. That's where we get our drinking water. So we have to be ultra protective of that part of our system. And then Of course, if we're not able to do that, we face potential regulatory fines for not meeting state, federal water quality regulations. So consequences either way. So for more information, we do have an online open house that provides a little bit more in-depth information. It's a little more user-friendly than what we're going over tonight. We welcome you to visit that. If you have questions after tonight, Vanessa, raise your hand in the back. We'll take questions, but if you think of them when you go home, call the hotline and Vanessa will return your call. Of course, tonight we had the community meeting, but our public hearing is on June 9th. And then if you have any neighborhood groups or if you belong to a community group, we have a few more weeks before the public hearing. We'd be happy to come speak to anyone, anywhere, anytime. And with that, we'll open it up for questions. It's not a big group, so we'll be pretty informal.